Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Blancato, CEO and President, Vladimir Kalman Asset Management, Chief Market Strategist for Mosaic. Welcome to another weekly market impact. It is August the 10th. Oh my gosh, this is getting crazy. We are just zooming through the year, everybody. Well, let me start off with a whole bunch of personal stuff because I can't help myself. First off, the tomatoes in my garden may be the best I've ever grown. They are bright, they are red, they are juicy, they're amazing. So if you happen to be in the New York City area, please stop by and I'll gladly give you some. The garden's going gangbusters. I haven't had enough time to really do some work on it. I've got plants that are kind of flopping over because they're not being supported right. So I'm being a lousy gardener. I've been a little bit busy, unfortunately, but the garden is exceptional. So for those gardeners out there, what a summer it's been. This combination of high heat and rain keeps the plants moist, and they've just been gang. I picked this zucchini yesterday that was literally this big, that far around, this big. The only thing I screwed up with my fig trees, I screwed those up. I took the wrappings of my fig trees off too early this year, and I probably won't get any figs because the one beautiful plant I have just died after I took the wrapping off too soon because it got cold again, froze it. So it had to grow from the roots, and by the time it gives me a crop, it might be too small. But my broccoli, incredible. Garlic, which is out of the ground already, incredible. I mean, across the board, my peppers, I cooked a bunch of fryers last night and fried them up. They were unbelievable. I mean, it's nothing quite like fresh produce, especially when you grow it yourself. Soon we'll start preserving the tomatoes again. I actually have a jar back there. What one of our jars will look like, by the way, for those of you who are on camera. This is a classic jar of tomato sauce. Mom and Dad help pass that recipe down for generations. I take mine from, well, not just me, but we go from the tomatoes, and everything in the sauce is homegrown other than the salt and pepper. That's including the bay leaf and the basil and the oregano, everything. We go from the tomato to pureeing it to cooking it and seasoning it to jarring it, which most people don't season it. We do. So that's a little bit different. Much more to come on the tomatoes. The most important personal update of this past week was that I was on my annual family vacation. And for those of you who might follow me on Facebook, you're welcome to. I don't mind that. You're welcome. It's just personal stuff. I don't talk about business at all, of course. But certainly I put up all these pictures of my family, and there was darn close to 100 of us down in Wildwood Crest, New Jersey. And we had amazing weather. It was really pretty incredible. Wildwood Crest is this kind of little hidden gem on the Jersey Shore. Most people take the time and they just go to Cape May. And Cape May is a beautiful town. It really is a beautiful old town. Goes back, gosh, who knows how long, really, really far back, as far as a vacation touristy town. But what makes Wildwood kind of unique all into itself is that it's a very family town. I think it's the biggest boardwalk in the country, so that's always kind of fun. But beyond that, it's one of these places that, for me, it's just this kind of magical little place that I've grown up at and really enjoy spending time at. And while it has beautiful water, the water will be 75 degrees this time of year, really clean, great waves. It's got wonderful family stuff to do, like I mentioned, the boardwalk, but also just a place to chill out. Well, this year was exceptionally special because we went way back, and my Uncle Mario, otherwise known as Zio Mario, and Zia Anita, uncle and aunt, came to the event. And and my Zia Anna, all three, the last three living of the generation that came to the United States from Italy, all came, and then we talked about when this thing started, and we figured out it was 1964. We've been going to Wildwood Crest since 1964 as a family. Some years just a handful of people, and many years with many, many people. We kicked it off with our classic Sunday kickoff dinner, which I organize at the local art pavilion with pizza and sandwiches, eggplant parm, that kind of thing. And we all reunite, and then we spend a better part of 7 days together on the beach, just getting reacquainted. We have a wonderful time. We had a hula hoop contest, which I am terrible at. Twice, 2 nights in a row. My little niece, I call her, M, beat me handily. She's incredible at it. Evelyn is this little young lady that's just incredible at hula hooping. Anyway, I'm going on and on. Wonderful time. And the reason why I bring it up is I often get questions about my background and my family, my heritage. And it's moments like this that feed your soul. When you need that reconnection with family and friends, when you need that chance to just kind of chill out. And granted, I still worked while I was there. I keep an eye on markets. I had a fun conversation about SpaceX with a number of people, especially my little cousin, who was adamant that we should not be buying it. And I think you should. Oh, well, let me be careful. I'm not making her that recommendation. I just think it's a pretty good company. So I won't tell you to buy or sell it, but I think it's a good company. My point is when you have these moments of with friends and family, and mine's the majority, it's actually all family this trip. It really is a chance to fill yourself back up with love and joy and pride and have a great time. So that was my week. If you get a chance, look at my Facebook page and you'll see all these great family pictures that are out there. And then one thing really unusual happened. Once my uncle figured out what the start date of it was, we it got out to the town, and I'll talk about it, my friend John Lynch in just a second here. My friend, I'll talk about him now. John Lynch is the head of marketing for all the Wildwoods. Turns out he's a very passionate UGA football fan, Georgia Bulldog fan. And over the last few years, we've gotten to know each other because of our love for Georgia football. By the way, Marcella goes back to school Wednesday. Hard to believe it's already here. She's my nickname for Marcella is Shorty. It's a long story. She's quite tall. She's almost 6 foot tall, 5'11". But as a kid, I always called her Shorty. It was my little way of that. She was on a soccer field or running track, she knew it was me reaching out to her because she was slowly growing and then finally caught up and passed everybody else, or so it would seem. But anyway, she goes back to her senior year at UGA. Quite incredible that's happening. But John Lynch, my buddy, who I've gotten to know very well, is the head of marketing. Well, we learned about Georgia together, have become friends. Went to the Sugar Bowl together last year when Georgia lost to Ole Miss. But I happened to see him down in Wildwood. He spent a lot of time with my family, and he talked to the mayor, and they got along, and they decided that August 6th in Wildwood, New Jersey, would be a proclamation day for the Russo, Blancato, Gagliardi, and Diorio families. And that day would recognize our 62 years of going to Wildwood Crest since 1964. And the way we gather as a family to celebrate our traditions, our heritage, our love for one another, and the success of the generations. We have 5 generations that go. And one of the things I do is I put up these 2 gigantic flagpoles, and one of them has all colleges, and I've run out of room. Whether it's Penn State, Ohio State, Tennessee, James Madison, Alabama, Muhlenberg, Montclair, all these universities. At the top of it's Georgia, by the way. And then the other flagpole has the American flag, the Italian flag, a photo of the original founders of our family, and then and then a flag of Sicily and a flag of Lazio, where we're all from. And why I mention all this to you because I often, I say thank you. I've said thank you a few weeks ago so there's so many of you listening now, thousands of people each week, and you all told me you love when I share a little bit about where I'm from and my background. And it was a moment like this that I can't thank John Lynch enough for stepping it up and doing this proclamation for my family, becoming my friend. Uh, and just an impressive guy. And to have our family honored that way. And my uncle, Zio Mario, received the proclamation from John after he gave a really heartfelt speech. It was awesome. So it really was a exciting moment for our family, a very emotional and cool moment. All right, that's enough because there's a lot to talk about with that stuff this week. Let's get into what's going on out there. Obviously, markets are doing quite well. And when you ask yourself why, at the top of the list has to be what's happening with the earnings. We're looking at 86% of companies beating earnings estimates for this year. Earnings growth is anywhere from 32% to 50%, depending on sector. Heck, energy sectors over 125% earnings growth. That's unbelievable that 29% have far exceeded analyst expectations. In fact, I'm in the Wall Street Journal today. I might quote, I'll read you the quote. The quote says, it's kind of goofy. These profit margins are incredible. Uh, and what else did I say? Yes. I'm sorry. They're somewhat ridiculous, and these profit margins are incredible. I have the journal right next to me today. Kind of cool to be in the Wall Street Journal. My reason for bringing this up is we often struggle with trying to justify the price of the stock market to how much companies earn. And when you see earnings growth be this incredible, the current PE on the S&P 500 is only 20, and that only. I'd be much comfortable at 18 because we get incredible earnings growth. But that's an amazing number. And when you see earnings season become this powerful and have this much success, it really makes you stop and think, is there more going on than just AI companies feeding AI companies? So that's the big narrative here. Is it just AI companies feeding AI companies or other companies in the picks and shovels? And it's actually not. You're looking at 32% earnings growth for without the mega scalers. For example, Amazon up there at 71% earnings growth without the mega scalers even in there. There is still incredible success in other areas. Small cap stocks with 25% earnings growth. So what we're seeing is this kind of incredible moment here where earnings season is like nothing we've ever seen before. Well, that's not fair. Just after the pandemic, it looks a lot like this. So why I bring it up is for the concern about stock market prices. It's hard to look at this analysis and not believe that this market can, continue to grind higher. Now, here's a key thing. Is this a year where we're gonna be, 30, 40% returns on the S&P? No, because the stock market's already priced to perfection. We saw a lot of good companies. Micron Technologies, not recommending you buy. I'm just suggesting talking about it. Micron came out with incredible earnings growth, and the stock was down. Datadog, great earnings growth, 30% earnings growth, stock's down. So it's because these high valuations sometimes require companies to be priced to perfection. So, but when 86% of companies beat their earnings estimate, and that's well above the when you think about that, the 5-year average is 78% beat. So we are well above it. And you're getting these incredible bottom line profit margin numbers. How much, if you make $1, how much do you keep? You're keeping around 15 cents, 12 to 15 cents, which is quite incredible. You're looking at, this is the highest percentage earnings growth in over a decade. Companies are beating by more than their average of around 31% higher than their average earnings growth. Really quite incredible. So when you think about all this piled together, we're looking at a scenario where if companies keep beating their earnings growth and we get revenue growth, bottom line margins of around 14%, the stock market's not expensive. And it's not cheap, but you do need this kind of euphoric growth to push the market higher. And the reality is the market's doing great this year. We had a brief little sell-off there, and last week we did 3.5% growth on the S&P 500 in just 1 week. 3.6 to be honest with you. The S&P is now up 14% on the year. That's a great number. If we don't grow it all the rest of the year, we stay flat from here. It's a solid number. The Dow's up 13.4, up 3.3 for the week. The Russell 2000 small cap stocks, one of my favorite asset classes, up 23% on the year. That had a relatively good week too. Small caps are up 3.54%. For the quarter, they're only up 0.4, so they're a little bit behind for the quarter, but my guess is they catch up fast. And actually, you know what? A good week finally, growth stocks. The Russell 1000 growth up 5.6 on the year, and for the week, up 5.5. So basically flat on the year before last week. My point is, all this earnings is boiling over into the rest of the stock market. What didn't do well last week? Emerging markets. That's only up 20% on the year. Believe it or not, the stock market, S&P 500, is beating emerging markets right now. That wasn't the case not but a month ago. Emerging markets were a lot higher. And then finally, international markets are up 19.76 on the year. It's a solid number. I'm sorry, 14.5 on the year. Forgive me, 14.5. I had those flipped. Emerging markets is still up 20%. The S&P's up 14. So forgive me, I screwed that up. But my point was emerging markets were still a lot higher and have come back down to earth and flat last week. International markets basically the same as the S&P 500. Sorry about that. So when you put it all together, there is this euphoria around earnings, and it's carried over into the market. Now, there was some other data that came out last week, and it affected the bond market. We saw unemployment post a pretty ugly number. Now, the unemployment number was impacted by, we saw a number of sectors underperform. Now, is that a spillover from the World Cup? I don't think so, actually. I really don't, as much as I would like to call it that. What we saw, job openings fell by 178,000. I'm sorry, jolts. The number of open jobs fell by 178,000 to 7.4 million. Still a solid number. But when you look at the payrolls, the number of people that were added last month, we were negative 23,000 for the month. So we were expecting 80,000 and we got a negative 23. So it's a little bit surprising. But in fairness, the May and June payroll were revised to basically a mixed bag, 103,000 both. What does this mean? Does it does it mean that we're suddenly in a worsening employment market? Probably not, because when you look at initial jobless claims, people filing week to week, that's around 200,000 a week. It's not a big deal. That's below. We hit the lowest number in since the 60s just the other day at 188,000. And then continuing claims, we got 1.8 million people still looking for jobs. Not a big deal. So we have this scenario where recent data suggests that the market's fine. And does the negative print for the month of July, the negative number 23,000 people losing their jobs instead of 80,000 getting it, represent a problem? I don't think so. We're in this no hire, no fire world. And the reality is, with very limited immigration, things are a bit wonky right now. And the wonkiness, I think, comes from the fact that we have a population we have retirees anywhere from 10 to 50,000 a day. We've got an older population that's, spending prolifically, keeping the U.S. economy afloat, that classic kind of K-shaped narrative. But the rest of the economy is doing fine. We're seeing retail sales numbers come out that are pretty good, and they're not terrible. The rise in gasoline hasn't really had an impact. Heck, just for fun, guess how much we're going to spend on back to school? $43 billion. We're about to set a record because back to school season's already started. In the East Coast, we don't go back to school until after Labor Day, which is, to me, normal. You get out of school Memorial Day or just before it, you're out by Labor Day, you get a real summer. Down south, they're out by early May and they're already back at school. But anyway, $43 billion is going to be spent on back to school, $864 per family. So that doesn't suggest the U.S. consumer stretch because we're not seeing real default or anything like that either. So I put it together and say that, this job number wasn't the best of number, but in a no hire, no fire world, I don't think that the days of us adding 200,000 people a month, which is what we used to do, is the real number. I think putting a post-pandemic world is probably 50,000 a month or flat. Now we're also seeing the participation rate. Number of people who are eligible for a job. We're also seeing that number come down a little bit, which doesn't I don't love that, but that's again less available people to work in the workforce means you have a lower participation rate. So it does put us in this weird spot where we need immigration again. I don't love there's a lot of controversy around HB1 visas that we're not bringing in more people. In the world of AI, you could argue someday we won't need more people, but right now we do. So I think that's a problem that we have to have. But the labor market number, I don't think was that big of a deal. We got two other numbers. ISM manufacturing. We are now at some really impressive numbers. We're at 55 on the month of July. Now, anything above 50 is expansion. And now we're looking at 7 months of expansion in the manufacturing sector. This is really exciting. We haven't had this length of growth or this type of growth in over 3 years' time. And it's been very sporadic over the last 10 years. Maybe the one big beautiful bill is working. That experiment I talked to you about a little while ago, a couple months back, that does the lower cost of building new plants. The fact that you could write all those costs off, create a manufacturing renaissance in the United States. And it seems to be doing that. We haven't had this consecutive month-over-month growth of manufacturing in a long time. So I think that's quite exciting. And then when you look at ISM services, that's also at 54.1. Came down from 54.5, a little bit lower, but anything above 50 is expansion. So it clearly tells you that there's a lot more going on here than we realize. That I think the U.S. economy is in great shape. The labor market's no hire, no fire. We have 7.4 million jobs open. We have no real concerns about weekly claims, and we're growing in both services and manufacturing. That's pretty darn good. I don't think we have a lot to worry about there. When I look what's coming this week, we're going to get some really important data this week. We're going to get a whole bunch of information on inflation. And then we'll get CPI this week and we'll get PPI this week. How much it costs, how expensive it is to make stuff, how expensive it is to buy stuff. I don't love CPI. I think it's an old index that could be used a little updating. I care more about PCE, personal consumption expenditure versus consumer price index. They are different because the consumer price index has some things in there I don't think we should spend time on. But it does have a rent number in there that I think that is pretty important. So we'll come back and look at that. I guess my point on this is the U.S. economy put up some darn good numbers last week, and that's why we saw real growth of the S&P 500. What we didn't see was the bond market reacting in a favorable way. So bonds for the week were up 0.6, which actually is pretty good, all things considered. But we're still flat on the year in bonds. And it doesn't really matter what type of bond you're owning. High yield, you're up 2.4%. Not worth owning it. Too much risk in a sector that's not producing enough. So my point is, in the bond market, still thinking that the Fed's going to have to hike rates. But the Fed got a bit of a break last week. When the unemployment data was negative, they don't want to be hiking rates into a negative unemployment market because their mandates, there's two of them, inflation and unemployment. I'd argue there's three now with managing the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. But having said all that, it's clear to me that I think we have a scenario where, in fact, the Fed might just be on pause now. So the bond market should react to that. We should see favorable returns. Interest rates start to going down because I still think it's quite a long shot, excuse me, that the Fed is going to hike rates. If the situation in Iran gets worse, and we also over the weekend that Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the plan for peace. The Iranians are demanding payment for the damage done to their country, as well as being able to control the Strait of Hormuz. All these things suggest we're not there yet. For all the expectations that this thing was going to wind down, it doesn't look to be winding down at all, unfortunately. So what that puts us in a scenario is that inflation could stay higher. So with a weakening job market and a bit higher inflation because of oil and gas, what is the Fed to do? I think nothing. I think they will stand pat and not have to be in a scenario where they're willing to take the risk of hiking when they don't need to. Hopefully, there's a means to an end with Iran. It's taken a lot longer than we thought. We had analysts tell us it's quite the opposite. People who study this all day long thought this thing would be over, and it's not. So, unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. I did see a storyline that I thought was interesting that I thought I would at least bring up for you for a second. I'm never a fan of big government. And I know at a time when there's folks winning elections that are not your typical candidate, maybe there's some folks on this podcast that don't really agree with that. I'm a capitalist by nature. It's who I am. But I do think sometimes when government goes a bit too far, you got to be careful that it doesn't create some real issues out there. When you look at what happened in 2008, and we needed regulations because the banks were over borrowing. Generally, the banks were the primary source of lending. And if you look at where we were in call it 1975, U.S. bank lending at a share of total non-commercial debt, non-commercial corporate debt, was 50%. And it's been going down and down and down. When you look at 2008, it was 30%. And today it's down to about 15. What happened was the regulations got so stringent that the banks can't really afford to lend anymore. So what's a bank to do? Well, they go to somewhere else. What's a person to do, I should say? They go to private entities to borrow money. So whenever you try to overregulate in the public space, the private sector usually steps in and takes advantage of something the government did. And that's a good example. My worry is that banks are the horsepower of capitalism. When a bank can lend at a small business who's adding a second shop because they make donuts and they want to sell more donuts, so they open up a separate location. If they got to go to the private space is going to want to maybe own a piece of the business or have higher rates of lending. Whereas the banking world, they just loan money. So having the banks out of it's a bit concerning for me. I'm not thrilled that that's what's happening, but it's part of the trend. So as a weird kind of update this week, I thought I would mention that that's just something that's out there. It's got me a bit spooked, and I hope that we get banking regulations a bit easier, so banks can be a big part of what's happening in this kind of maybe a rebuild of the American manufacturing sector or the growth of the small cap sector because AI is so powerful and stimulating it. By the way, just I always like some weird headline. There's on August the 12th, just a couple days from now, there are three events that happen that day which are super cool. First off, there is a aligning of the planets. You'll see 7 planets in a row if you're willing to get up before sunrise. By me on the East Coast, it's 5:18 in the morning. Then There's a solar eclipse, and if you live in Europe, specifically Spain or Russia, you'll get a full eclipse of the sun. On the East Coast, we get a partial. It's kind of fun. And then at night, there's a meteor shower. And it's such a prolific meteor shower. You should see a shooting star every 30 seconds. One of the biggest meteor showers we get. It won't happen again until 2040. So if you're out there and you want to catch a glimpse of some cool stuff, whether it's morning, midday, or night, and depending on your cloud cover, you might just get a chance to go out there and get a pretty cool sight of what's happening in the world. I want to wrap up this week by saying things are good, everybody. Not much to be concerned about. The war's got some issues. It could push gasoline prices higher. Global oil supplies are a little bit low, a lot low. But so far, it hasn't been a major issue. The U.S. consumer is still spending, whether it's back to school or vacation. Down in Wildwood Crest, the beach was packed. I couldn't believe it. I did notice the restaurants were not as busy as they used to be. I think that's because people are maybe cooking at home or cooking in their when the place I stay is the Armada by the Sea. Great little hotel. And it's the old school balcony, one long balcony on 5 floors. So when you open your door in the morning, it's not private. The person to your right, who you may or may not know, you say good morning to, and then one on your left. Generally, the floor that I'm on is almost with my whole family. So we get up, we have coffee in the morning. Somebody might make a pork roll, egg, and cheese. Then at lunchtime, we come up and we have a very Italian lunch. A little bit of red wine, sausage, prosciutto, provolone, a variety of cheeses. Manchego snuck its way in there. I'm a pecorino sardo and a Parmigiano Reggiano guy. Then a little fresh buffalo mozzarella and regular mozzarella, obviously fresh tomatoes. And then the feast at lunchtime is focused on frese. And frese is a hard bread patty. It's more Southern Italian. It's kind of like a bruschetta, but more fancy. You raise the dough twice, cook it twice, season it. So when you make a salad on top of this hard bread patty, it soaks into the bread. You bite it, and it's quite amazing. That's what lunch is like at breakfast. But my point is, Wildwood was very crowded, and we eat in a lot to have our sauce, homemade sauce. I brought one in for a friend today, and we have a lot of fun, enjoying it and eating it. Maybe more people in Wildwood ate in this time. I don't know, but the place was packed. The beach was full, so that's a good time for the economy. My point is, enjoy the summer. Stop letting the headlines worry you. Don't worry about the war. This is going to work itself out. I don't think we're going to see any boots on the ground anytime soon. It might be hotter to get colder. I could see that. But certainly, I don't think you want to get yourself too worked up in all this stuff right now because everyone gets themselves so worried about headlines when they really shouldn't be. And I wrap up with my shout out of the week. My shout out of the week goes to John Lynch. John Lynch is a Southern guy, moved north with his beautiful wife. I'm not sure if she'd want me to say it, but her name is Vicky. It's okay. Don't tell her I said that. It's a wonderful couple, and they don't have any children, so they have adopted the world as their kind of how to help out. And if you know John, what's cool about John is he really spends his days giving back. Him and his wife Vicky. While I was there, he did surfing for people with spinal cord injuries. He has lunch events for kids who have never been to a fancy restaurant. He does things every single day for the community. And yeah, there's big events like, at the convention, there might be a wrestling match that he was actually a referee in a wrestling match, a charity match. But along the year, his primary job is to have people come into the Wildwoods. But he also does a lot of philanthropic work for the world. He's a believer in God. He's a believer in America, a very pro-American type person. But he's mostly a believer in people. Someone said to me, he's never met a stranger he didn't know. Great way to put it. Never met a stranger he didn't know. And that's who he is. A person who can embrace the world, be a person who wants to make the world a better place to be, to do good and be good. If you ever get down to Wildwood Crest, New Jersey, look up John Lynch, and you'll meet a guy who's truly an exceptional human being. And it's an honor for me to be his friend, to call him my friend. Now, if he was honest, he'd say, "Go Dogs." So yeah, go Dogs, definitely. We're big Bulldog fan, him more than me. But that's not why he's my shout out. My shout out is because he's one hell of a person. He's one of those people that you feel better about life when you spend time with him, and that's not easy. There's not many people like that in the world, and John Lynch is one of them. Everybody, I hope you enjoy summer as we wrap this thing up, and it starts coming to an end here. Enjoy the summer days. Look at me, I got some sand. I'm gonna enjoy them. I'm gonna be playing in the garden, making sauce. Spend some time up in the woods. I haven't done much of that this year. back down the beach. I do love the Jersey. I'm a body surfer. I love body surfing. I get out there and do that. I did some boogie boarding. I got to get a better board. My board's kind of beat up. But besides that, as we wrap up, imagine in Monticello, New York last night, it hit the 50s already. How about that? So if you're up in Maine or Minnesota, I bet you're already seeing some nights in the low 50s, maybe high 40s. It's coming. It's all good. It's all part of the deal. But before it's gone, enjoy these summer days with your friends and family. Enjoy the days with someone like John Lynch, and make sure you have a little bit of sunset in your life before the sunsets are a little shorter and a little faster. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, a great week. Take care. Talk to you on the show.